Hey guys, my name is Boris, and today I'll be talking about CSS Grid and Flexbox. Layouts on the web have always been tricky. When the internet first came around, there was really no way of laying anything out or no even idea of styles of any kind. Then we had tables, and then inside those tables were more tables, and inside more of those tables were even more tables. And that was really the best way to do the job, but it really was painful and not great at all. And when CSS came around 20 years ago, in 1997, we got some better technology. It actually beat out a couple of other languages that really don't exist anymore, no one else uses, but they were around. People were now able to lay things out and use floats and things like divs and similar things to what you use today. There was still a lot of difficulties and annoyances like clearing floats and negative margins, and eventually people had to think about responsive design. So that led to hundreds of frameworks like Bootstrap and other things that you are aware of today, and they kind of made things better to use, they made more sense, and people weren't annoyed at CSS as much as they were before. And that's how things have been for the last however many years. And so we get to today, which is Flexbox and CSS Grid. So both Flexbox and Grid are just new properties on the display. They're just new values for the CSS display property. If you just want to make a container a flexbox, you just write display flex. If you want to make it a grid, you write display grid. It's really that simple. And as soon as we do that, all the immediate children of that element become a flex item. All the children become flex items, and all the children of a grid container become grid items. You don't need to import any kind of outside files. It's all already there in CSS. So the big question is, which one do you use? And you really use them together. You use them separate. Basically use them based on what you need out of it. If you're doing something in one dimension, either in a row or in a column, if you need to arrange items in that way, use a flexbox. If you need to create something more complex with things that have relationship to other items, you'll use CSS Grid. And CSS Grids are great for doing some stuff in big picture, like the entire layout. If they can handle things that are asymmetrical, things that are kind of weird, things that are overlapping. If you just have a bunch of items that you want to look neat in a row or just want to line up, then you want to use Flexbox. So things like Bootstrap are useful, but they can produce highly unsemantic class names, and they bloat the HTML. So as you can see, things like col6, col-sm4, col-lg4, that's all there only because Bootstrap is not part of CSS. It kind of extends CSS. So naturally, you'd assume that you just can't use regular CSS keywords like that with things like Bootstrap. Now that we have Grid, we can avoid the presentational class names and just use the regular semantic class names that you'd normally use with HTML. So this thing is going to load. So we don't have to be stuck with a 12-grid system like most framework systems use, like Bootstrap. We can have as many grids as you want. You want 151 rows, you can have it. You want 12 rows, you can have it as well. And you don't have to flow them from left to right like you do with the frameworks. You could have them go from right to left or from bottom to up any way you want. If you want to create elements that span multiple columns, you could do that. If you want elements that overlap each other, you can do that. If you want something that doesn't make any sense at all but is unique and artsy, you can do that too. And because CSS Grid and Flexbox were made after responsive design became pretty much a standard for anything you'd ever want on a website, they are responsive by default. So that's another good thing. So back in the day when we were using regular CSS and you'd want to make 4 elements in a row of the same size, you'd make them each, you set them each to 25%. And then if you'd want to add some spacing between them, you could set that spacing to 10 pixels. And that's all good and well, but with those 3 breaks of 10 pixels each, you'd have the 30 pixels basically had to come out somewhere, and they would come out from the last element. And I don't know if you can see that well, but that last 25% is not actually 25%, it's cut off. So you'd have to break out your protractors and do fancy math to figure out what each of those percentages actually has to be in order to work out and fit ideally like a quarter into the row. Good news, with Flexbox and CSS Grid, you never have to do math ever again, because there's the new FR unit, and that just means fraction. So you could set each thing to one fraction. So down on the green row, you can see that there's four elements, and they're each one fraction. And if you wanted to if you were to set one of those to 2 fractions, it would take up 2/5 of the row. If you wanted to set it to 3 fractions, it would take up 3/6 or a half of the row, etc. Pretty easy to understand. Yeah. So now I'm going to show you an example of something that you can do with CSS Grid. And I'm not really going to teach you anything other than that, because Flexbox and CSS Grid are really easy to pick up. And just to show you how easy it is, these are the docs for Express, these are the docs for Sequelize, and these are the docs for Flexbox and CSS Grid. So they're kind of very easy to find exactly what you're looking for and how to do that. And these aren't necessarily the docs for them. The docs for them kind of look like the docs for Sequelize and Express, but these are from CSS Tricks, which is kind of the go-to source for this type of thing. It's a very easy lookup. They have pages, which I link to later, that show exactly how to do anything you ever want to do. Okay, so that example that I was talking about, it's called the auto placement algorithm, and basically it's a way of arranging items on the page that you provide. So here we have 18 elements, and we set the display to grid. It has 5 rows, 5 columns, each of equal width, and we set it to have 5 rows as well, but there aren't enough elements to fill the 5 rows, so it will only fill up 4. This is very similar to how floats work. We just adds one element right after the other. This is pretty much the simplest thing you can do. So what happens when one of our items, number 7, decides to take up 2 rows and 2 columns, or we set it to set up 2 rows and 2 columns? And again, it's pretty simple too. So 8 won't be able to fit where it would normally fit, so it goes after 9, same thing. 10 goes on the next row, and 11 sees that there's no room for it under the 7, so it goes on to the next column, etc. The other items just continue stacking after that. So what happens if we want to make another item the same size? So now it's kind of weird because there's no room after 8, so it goes down to the next row, and then there's no room underneath 6, so it has to go on to the next one, and then there's that 7, so it goes on after 7, and it fits there. And if you look at the grid, 18 has now been pushed onto its own row, which is row number 6. But if you look down here, you can see that we only set it to 5 rows. So because of CSS's grid autoflow property, which is defaulted to row, it knows to go down on its own. And now this grid autoflow property, we can set that to column, and it will do the same thing, but it will arrange everything by column order. So 18 will, instead of being on the 6th row, will be on the 6th column. And here are the two that you can compare against each other. It's the same thing. One is just grid autoflow row, and one is grid autoflow column. And the wonderful property that grid autoflow has is called dense. So what happens with dense is that an item will look before it for any available space. And if it finds a space that it fits into, it will take it. So 9, if you look at 9, it can go after 8, so it places itself onto the next available space. But 10, because there's going to be a gap now after 8, it finds that gap and it puts itself there. So this is pretty great if your project is okay with it. If your items don't really matter what order they're in, and you just want it to look efficient and neat, this is great. Of course, if it needs to be in a specific order that you set and provide for it, then it won't work. Yeah, so you set grid autoflow row to dense. So is it the right time to implement it? And it probably is, because Firefox, Chrome, Safari, and Opera are all, you can use it, both Flexbox and CSS Grid in it right now. Edge will have it in the next version, and Internet Explorer doesn't even matter. Because who knows. So if you're into it, here are some resources for Flexbox. Here are some for CSS Grid. Flexbox Froggy is a great tool for Flexbox, and Grid Garden is a great tool for the grid. Here are the remaining sources that I have that weren't listed before, if you're interested in seeing what else is out there. That's all. Thanks.